Hi, my name is Sarah.
My name is Mujib.
And welcome to another episode of Let's Get To It. This is episode 32. This is a check-in episode. We're going to talk about communication, consent, and checking in with one another.
Yeah, I love that.
We have a
Sounds
lot.
good
We have
to
a
me.
lot. Good. So, okay, great. So I have your consent and approval for this topic today. But it's really, we make light of it, and we joke, but it's a really serious topic too, right?
Absolutely.
To make sure that people are on the same page as you.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's the key to the best relationships that we can have, is making sure that we all are all right. Like, here's a great example. Right before we started recording, I ran downstairs real quick and checked in with Kenzie, like, all right, we're about to start. You all right? Let's just do a quick check-in, because she came in. Since we started talking on Zoom, she came in and grabbed Zayd and went out, so I had to go and run and check in with her real quick so that I can make sure that I have a moment to make eye contact with her and see, like, where are we at right now? Okay, We're good. I'm going to run up here and go do this thing that I said we were going to do, but I still need to make sure right now if this is the best thing to do right now in this moment. So again, it's just another example of, like, if I didn't do that and she was having a hard time and this was happening or that was happening downstairs and I didn't take the time to check in, then I might be walking downstairs into a different situation once we finish here. And so, yeah, trying to ease everybody's experience, I think, is the best thing to look at consent, the reason for consent.
Yeah, consent and as you said, sort of checking in, I think, is one of the, like, maybe most underrated leadership qualities. What makes a good leader, what is, if you find yourself in a position where you're managing a team or you have employees or something like that, I think checking in is so valuable. Like, is the team on the same page? Does everybody feel good about what they're doing? This could be in a, employment scenario. It could be a coaching a team scenario. Is everybody on the bus? Is everybody, on the same wavelength? And I just think that's, a very underrated kind of important piece to what makes good leadership, coaching style, or boss, and all kinds of things. Because if you don't ask, you don't know. And it's important to ask,
Right.
And it's important to, not only just asking the question, but cultivating the kind of environment that you're going to get a truthful answer, right? Mm-hmm. So if you are in a partnership or relationship where there's an uneven power dynamic, or you're ruling with some out of fear, for example, you might ask that question, but you might not get an honest answer from the participants, because they don't feel like they can actually be honest with you and tell you what's really going on. So part one is asking, but also to even before you ask, having a relationship where people that are around you feel comfortable in discussing things honestly with you, as much as you can control that.
Right. And again, that comes back to checking in too, and making sure that people do feel that way. The only way to know if somebody is feeling that way is to, again, check in with them, present them with an opportunity to give you that honest answer or something like that. I feel like we're going to keep on circling back around to how checking in can lead to consent, or with a lack of consent, how you could have maybe found that out if you checked in. That sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. You've got to ask. There's got to be some of that baseline engagement, right? If you're not asking, you can't get any answers. But it's also, I was just mentioning this in our pre-conversation that, you might, let's see, we have a personal training relationship, right? So I go into your space and you've cultivated a very welcoming space where I feel like I can, say what I need on any given day, etc. But even so, even if you do cultivate the kind of space that allows people to come forward, it's still an internal thing, right? So, like, if I'm not a person that feels comfortable coming forward or speaking my truth, even if you've cultivated a great place to do it, right? If I haven't done the work to be able to speak on my needs or advocate for myself, like, that's tough too. Mm-hmm. So there is that element. And the only reason I say that is because I come from a place where for decades it was really hard for me to to actually say to people what it is I wanted or needed, even in very genuine, loving contexts. So there's that too. It's just so complicated.
Right.
Is what it comes down to. There's so many moving pieces.
Yeah. And that's why I think in any type of partnership or relationship, that's why it becomes, at least for me, like this. And actually, I'll take a second and just speak from my own experience. That's in those situations. That's why it has become important to cultivate that I don't know, inquisitiveness. How are you doing? How are you still? Are we still on the same page? Are we still going in the right direction? Like, is this going how you thought it would go? You know, like, this is a dream situation for me, but maybe for the person who I'm working with, there's a lot missing or a lot lacking, you know?
Yeah.
And so let's make sure that we're still in the right trajectory. And then there's also the reality of, like, well, now that you're, like, in the personal training situation, like, now that, so you came through the door, and now that you're where you are, where do you want to go? You know, because we've gotten to where you were trying to get when you first came through the door. Where do you want to go next? And so, like, that in any type of relationship, in a business relationship, it's the best thing to do. Like, okay, we had this big win. Well, now that we've got this big win, are we still planning on doing the same thing with our winnings? You know? So, like, if you know, I'm going to take my winnings and reinvest them back into the business. I'm going to take my winnings and buy me a hot air balloon. Oh, well, maybe we aren't actually still on the same page anymore.
Right.
Maybe we're not thinking about the same things. Maybe, you know, this was the end goal for you, but my goal is actually to go somewhere much greater. And, you know, especially in the generation that we're in, or the age range that we're in, there's a lot of that, you know, like people partnering up, coupling up, getting married, buying houses and stuff like that. And then 10 years later, 15 years later, however long down the line, sometimes much shorter than that, folks are like, you know, this isn't really what I wanted at all. I went with it until I learned my voice. And then when I found my voice, I learned that, hey, I'm going to speak up for myself right now and try to get myself into the better situation, or closer towards what I'm actually desiring. But again, unless we had a conversation about what we're actually desiring as individuals, then I can't assume. There's no assumed consent. You know, I can't assume that you're gonna go along with everything that I want to do.
I think fleshing that out is an interesting idea, like this idea of assumed consent, especially for people who have either been we could bring it back to the romantic stuff, but, like, you know, if you've been in a partnership for a long time, or if you have crossed over and you're married, there can be, I don't know if complacency is the right word, or just an assumption that, like, okay, we're just kind of going along. And, you know, certainly I think there's big decisions in life, like, you know, maybe the decision to start a family is usually not always present, but it's often a conversation, not always. But there's other things too that sometimes couples just don't talk about, which it is super important, like, because we're always evolving, and there's often, like, a change of direction, and you know, ideally, if you're in a partnership situation, you grow together, but you can't really grow together unless there is that communication piece and checking in, like, oh, are you still good with this? Like, because maybe it's been 5 years and actually things have changed. Like, we're all living in our own bodies, having our own experiences, like, separate from our partners. So unless you are communicative about what is going on, especially anybody out there that's doing a lot of internal work, if you find that you've come to different ideas or different needs, you know, share those.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it can be scary too. I mean, sometimes it can, you know, I think sometimes people avoid these conversations because they're afraid, like, oh, if I tell my partner I no longer want this, or maybe I want this now, maybe they're not going to like that. Right. Or maybe they're going to leave me. Like, I think there's a lot of fear sometimes involved in why people might not be communicating or shy away from that check-in, right? Because we're afraid of what's going to happen as a result of it.
Right. Yeah, and past experiences can definitely dictate that too. Like, if I'm used to speaking my mind and having somebody, reprimand me for it, or if I'm used to asking for what I'm getting and having somebody, like, maybe the pattern that started when I was a little kid was somebody telling me I asked for too much. And so I get into this habit of, like, always second guessing myself because somebody told me somewhere back down the line that I asked for too much. So maybe I've already asked for enough. I don't need to ask for any more. Or maybe I've already said enough, so I don't need to say any more. For every 5 decisions that we make, 4 decisions go in your favor for 1 decision that goes into mine for every single 5 decisions that we make. So next thing you know, like, yes, you got 15 things that you want in this house. I got 5 things that I wanted in this house. And maybe we're not really having that good of a time at that point, right? I think about it a lot of the times with my friends who will be like, like, we go over to Johnny and Jane's house every Sunday for brunch, and, they watch the game in the fall, and then somebody's like, man, I fucking hate doing that. Like, I hate going over to Johnny and Jane's. Like, I can't stand it. You know what I mean? But my son, my such and such wants to do that every time. But, in reality, like, my ideal Sunday would be to let my such and such go and stay here and chill or take some personal time. Well, at that point in time, if we're putting ourselves in these situations where we're not checking in, or we're not letting our partners know, or we're not letting our people know, like, this is what I would rather do, well, then what are we prioritizing at that point in time? Like, am I prioritizing... I'm under prioritizing my own needs, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not prioritizing my own enjoyment, which is ultimately going to lead to a degradation of our mutual enjoyment, because if I'm not enjoying myself, then I doubt we're always going to be enjoying ourselves together, at least not for too long. I mean, I couldn't, at least for myself, like, I couldn't see myself being in a position, and for my partner, my wife, I couldn't see us being in a position where one person is just unhappy all the time. And that leading to, like, a good life,
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is just, like, the potential resentment that can build up over time, when those like, if you are going to Johnny and Jane's every weekend and you're you're hating it, and, you spend too many weekends or a year or 2 years, and you're just, that resent builds, and that's just, it's such a visceral feeling too. And I think about, even in one of our podcasts, It's Elemental podcast, we talked a little bit about kind of going against the grain. And I feel that way, like, in relationships, if we're not speaking our truth, if we're not being honest about what we're comfortable with, like, it has very real consequences and bodily consequences, psychic and just kind of, like, digestive and, like, other, it's a stressful situation. I feel like, right, when you're not really, when you're not letting yourself live out, what you really need and what you want. And it's tricky because, if you're cohabitating with somebody, or you live in any kind of family unit or shared household, whether you're dating these people or your friends and you have 6 roommates, like, there is this element of balance. Like, chances are, we talk a lot about, you got to get your needs met. That's super important. But in reality, like, there are times where it's just like, okay, I got to compromise on this one this time. Or, you know what, I got to give up the remote tonight because The Bachelorette is on. Actually, let me just set the record straight. I do not watch The Bachelorette, but it's fine if anyone out there does. Right. But just for a cultural example, right? So it's, I think of, even in my own partnership, I can, I've gotten much better about expressing, like, what it is that I need, but I also know there's just times where I'm like, okay, tonight it's actually not about me. And there's that too, and that's just kind of part of that. And everybody's got to decide how much of that goes on in their relationship, right? There's no, like, magic formula out there. I don't think. Right.
No, I think that's the balance. I think that's the thing about balance, is because, it's, if I'm dealing with two static objects, right? Like a rock on one side and a rock on the other side, and I'm just finding a balance point between those 2 rocks, and that's one thing. But if I'm dealing with a dynamic, a moving, a growing, a shedding, reality. Like, I'm a person, I'm a dynamic human being. There are certain things, this conversation right now is going to inform certain decisions that I make going forward. And so, you know, the balance is like, you know, maybe me myself seeing that I am always leading these conversations, always leading what we're going to do for the night. Maybe it's my own personal work to be like, actually, I need to be giving away more of this. I need to be less controlling. It's that personal work. But again, unless, if I have that thought, well, maybe, you know, I'm being an asshole. Hey, partner, how does this make you feel when I do this? That makes it, wow, I never thought you'd ask. Oh, well, ding. There's tech number one. Like, okay, well, you never thought I'd ask, then that must mean that you have a certain perspective of me, perception of who I am, you know what I mean? And then now that you asked, let me tell you, I'll actually inform you that, yeah, sometimes you do make me feel small. Sometimes you do make me feel like my voice is like I can't really speak over you, you know? Sometimes, especially in partnerships, there can be that, like, one person just has the bigger voice than the other person. So, and we always talk about that with personality types too. Like, you know, somebody, when I've ever taught, like groups, like actual educational groups where we're sitting down and we're asking questions and people are raising hands and things like that, you know, there's always going to be that personality that, like, is never going to be the first person to try to speak. They're never going to be the first one to try to jump in the front. But there's always going to be those personalities that are always the first people. They're always right there in the front. They're always the teacher's favorite, all those different things. And, you know, and in those sorts of relationships where, as an instructor, we're not reaching out and pulling, you know, the best out of everybody, then again, we're not doing the right justice by that relationship, by that community that we've just created. Because the best balance in a grouping of people is to have everybody be having their best experience that they could be having. It's not, if you have a group of 12 people, it's not really a success if 10 people are having a great time and 2 people are completely disenfranchised by the entire thing that's going on. Likewise with a relationship, there's no win, whether it's a one-on-one relationship, whether it's a family unit. There's no win if somebody in that unit is also just fucking miserable the whole time. Unless you don't care. But again, with me and probably the way that we're having a conversation, I could probably assume the same with you, but I'd ask you before I just assumed it was the same with you. But with me, that doesn't equate to we're having a good time if somebody's like completely fucked off and miserable. That sort of thing.
Oh, okay. So bringing up the sort of group facilitation thing, I must give a shout out to your wife, Kenzie Khaliq, who, and I took a business workshop with her, and she did an amazing job of making sure that everyone was heard. And even part of the way she facilitated that was to say, if you've had a chance to speak or if you've spoken a lot, let's give other folks a chance to speak as well. So she made it a point to do that. So I love that you said that, because I was like, Kenzie did that and just really made space for folks. And that's part of it too, because absolutely, you know, we've all been in those scenarios where, look, I'll be honest, I've always been a front row kid and never shy. You know, to speak, but always mindful in the back of my head not to just take over. And to try to be courteous. And then, you know, there's personalities where sit in the back and may have really amazing things to share, but just, you know, there needs to be an opportunity made. Like, okay, let's see what, you know, Jessica has to say, or share the floor and share the mic. So shout out to Kenzie.
I love that. Yeah, definitely. Huge shout out to Kenzie. I've learned so much from her about just being able to communicate consent in all sorts of different on all sorts of different levels, not just assuming that, you know, you're not saying something because you don't have anything to say, or like the idea of active listening, things like that. And like, you know, I feel a lot of like misguidance from television ultimately, where like so much of the conversation that I know for myself, you know, like TV was the broadest range of human interactions that I had seen as a child. You know, like I had my interactions, I had my friends, but like TV is going to show you how, you know, Rock the trash man treats his father and his brother, and so like you get an experience of that situation. You get a chance to see how, you know, Jesse treats Donna on this show, and so, but what it really does is that it makes us think that like our communication is based on sound bites or on cuts. I'm going to say the last thing and then I'm going to turn around and walk out of the room, you know? No, if I turn around and walk out of the room, I don't give you a chance to say anything, but I also don't give myself a chance to hear what you have to say. And so, like, I've definitely been responsible and guilty of, like, speaking again too quickly, you know, because somebody, like, Kenzie's communication style isn't the same as mine. So, like, where she'll hear something and want to digest that and take her time before she comes back with her retort or with her response. You know, it's my personality is like, if somebody's not saying something when you're done speaking and somebody doesn't have something to say, then maybe they're not listening or they don't care about what you're saying, you know what I mean? And it took us some time to come into a communication style of being like, oh, that's what's happening. Like, all of my previous experience tells me that if I say something to you and you don't have something to say immediately or cut me off or something, then you must not be listening to me. Whereas her experience is like, never cut people off when they're talking, like have them have their entire moment to speak, and then when they're done, say something. You know what I mean? And so, like, it's like, okay, well, I would never know that was our difference in communication styles unless I took the time to listen to her. And actually, thankfully, it was that she took the time to, like, stop me and say it. You know what I mean? And be like, you know, I don't communicate the way that you're communicating. And so we're going to continue to have conflict until we realize that we need to find a balance in our communication styles that allows us to both feel heard and feel, you know, like we're receiving the other person.
You know, what's really important about that too is it shows that I think sometimes we can be a little bit deterministic in there's a couple of different ways that could have gone for you guys. You could have just come to the point where, look, we don't communicate well together. Peace. Right? That is legit one scenario, because I'm sure I've been in interactions and relationships in my past where I'm just like, this is really hard. You're not listening. We don't communicate. I'm out. Right. There's another way to go about it is to say, we don't communicate very well, or we seem to be kind of, you know, we're having some problems. I'd really like to figure out how we can communicate better understand each other. And it's just taking that moment, like, is it worth doing that extra work, taking the time and saying, okay, this is your communication style, this is your background, this is how you're used to communicating, here's mine, and then, you know, just navigating that. Like, it is possible. I think sometimes we can get really, I don't know, in this, and maybe it's changing now, but like in just a very quick results kind of like instant gratification kind of culture, like, just be really quick to, like, be done with people if it takes extra work. Right. And I think this is so important. Even think back to our episode on common threads. You know, like, we can reach common ground, right? It might take some work. It might mean saying, like, okay, your communication style is different, so it's going to take a little extra work for us to hammer this out, but I'm willing to do the work. Like, what you have to say is important to me, right? And so without that kind of mutual respect and without that willingness to improve or advance or, you know, there will be scenarios where, you know, both people have to, like, find it worthwhile. Right. But it is possible, right? So I'm just kind of saying, like, you know, I'm sure we've all been in scenarios where we just throw up our hands and go, it's too fucking hard, I'm out.
Right. Totally.
But it's not impossible. I don't think there's anything too impossible, you know, if you're really, really interested.
Right. I mean, if the goal, if the mutual, again, it comes back to mutual goal. Like, if our mutual goal is to get to this level of existence in which we want to be able to communicate with our partners, then we're going to be presented with opportunities to become better communicators. But if our goal is, if we don't have a mutual goal, or again, if our goals aren't actually compatible, you know, this person might be looking for a soulmate, this person might be just like, I'm looking for the next one already. Well, then, you know, then it's going to be easy to clash. And because, you know, I've definitely been in situations where like I've had long-term relationships where the partner that I was with never met anybody in my family. And, you know, I might have met all of their family members, mother, father, grandfather, grandmother, brother, sister, best friend, all that stuff. And this person actually doesn't know anything about me. Like, to this day, this person probably has no idea what my mother's name is, and I might have been in a relationship with them for like 6 years. But the entire time that we were in that relationship, I always knew that this relationship is nothing. This isn't actually gonna go anywhere. Like, I had that in my own picture. Like, I was always like 1 foot out of the door sort of idea. Like, you want to go, it doesn't matter, you know, that sort of thing. Or like, if we're clashed, it's not worth working it out because this doesn't matter at all. This is a summer fling that's gone on for too long, that sort of idea. And I was younger then. You know, I thought I had more time for stuff like that in my life. I thought I had more bandwidth for that type of relationship to actually take up my time. I was a lot more stressed out. I was a lot more, dysfunctional as a human being, right? My living situation was pretty garbage because I am living with somebody who I'm not actually committed to. I'm not that actually interested in this person beyond a certain level. Yet I'm like going to their parents' house for Christmas, you know what I mean? And so it's like, how good is our relationship actually going to be? What's our communication style? Actually, I ran into this person some years ago, and we got to have a conversation from a more mature place in both of our lives. And it was interesting to be like, wow, like, this is why I thought you were such a cool person to begin with. I wish that I had had the foresight. I was young, I was 21, but I wish I had had the foresight to be able to be like, oh, like, maybe there's a better reason for us to be in the same space than the reason that we think it is. And so instead of just pouring on, like, this is our like our own depiction of a romantic domestic situation. Like, I'm gonna live with this person and we're gonna share space, but I don't actually know anything about doing that with somebody, and so I'm not gonna be actually a good partner in that way because the things that I want are so much different from the things that this person wants that they're gonna be pretty miserable most of the time, and when they're not miserable, I'm probably gonna be miserable, so on and so forth. So again, that's a long-winded way of saying, like, unless the communication and the end goal is mutual, unless we're trying to be better communicators, unless we're trying to actively, like, make our situation better mutually, then, you know, of course it's always, I can't say that it's always going to be fucked up, but for myself, anytime that I've been in that situation, it has turned into a dysfunctional situation after a while.
I want to go back to something that you kind of alluded to previously too about, you know, where we get a lot of our ideas about relationships and communication in general from, you know, TV, movies, you know, whatever we're consuming culturally, because, you know, we exist in our households and have our little networks of friends and family, and that's super informative, right? That environment that we firsthand witness and are part of. But then the next biggest thing is media that we consume, especially as children and as adolescents, and I think too, like, when folks become sexually active and have questions, and we have such a sexually repressive culture still, at least in the United States, I think, and that a lot of these interactions, like, we learn from pornography, we learn from movies, and it's not always setting great examples for communication, right? And the reason I say that is because we have to understand who is writing, producing, and directing that content. And when we start to, like, figure out that much of the media that we're consuming is made by very few individuals with a very specific tunnel vision point of view, and yet that's what millions of us are using as proper examples for relationship, sex, communication, otherwise. And, well, I think the results are in, and it hasn't been working out very well. Right.
Total truth.
And I think we're seeing a lot of changes, which is fantastic. But you know, for us, we're in our late 30s, so we've been relatively scarred by by a few decades of consuming this material.
Right, it's the truth.
But I know, I mean, I have to personally just say, as a identify as a heterosexual female, like I pretty much thought there was one way to go about things. And it was generally being very acquiescent and submissive to whatever my partner wanted. And that seemed like, if you want guys to like you, just go along with it. Right. And, sadly, and it's really inspiring and wonderful to see that, definitely the generations also check out the My Generation podcast. But to see, folks obviously older my age, but younger, really paving the way for that not being the case for them.
Right.
Which is really great.
No, I hope that we continue to have more of a consent and a mutual communicative culture, it's better, period. It's better to know what your partner wants, always, whenever trying to give. It's like giving a gift of anything. If I'm buying you chocolate, but you're allergic to chocolate, you know what I mean? But you take it. you always take it and give it to your neighbor, or give it to your friend, or pass it off to somebody else, or donate it. You never tell me that you're allergic to chocolate. I never ask you what you actually want. Then, again, I think I'm doing the best thing in the world. I think I'm the most bravo person out there. But in reality, I'm not. Because the person who I'm with isn't enjoying anything that I'm actually doing, isn't actually receiving anything that I'm trying to put out there. And again, for the myriad of reasons, that's okay. that's going to be, it's so common that it's okay that it becomes the norm, you know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas it's misguidance, really, for myself. I didn't have anybody to tell me that, all of, I was thinking about with sex and with sexual repression and things like that, what some of the earliest interactions with sexuality and with expressions of sexuality are met with reprimand, because it's the first time you get caught with a magazine, or the first time you get caught masturbating, or so now all of a sudden it's this fear that's attached to it, depending on how the person who caught you responded, and that person only responded based on what on their belief structure. So now my response to me catching my children in those acts is going to be a lot different than the response of my parents catching me in those acts, because I have a different sexual maturity. I have a different sexual expression. I have a different, I'm a completely different generation around interacting with sex and sexuality. And so I'm going to be able to give my children a broader scope, a broader range of what, obviously explore your body versus shame, because if it's shame when I'm 7, then I'm always going to have that shame plan in the back of my head. With even I'm going to be 17 years old, basically hiding. I'm going to be 22 years old in my own apartment, essentially hiding, trying to prioritize my own pleasure. Well, I'm not actually prioritizing my own pleasure at that point. I'm prioritizing somebody else's perception of how I'm supposed to be interacting with my own body, you know what I mean? And so for me, when I think about sexual repression, it's so much of that right off the bat. That's just we don't get to, in my generation, at least, from where I came from and how I came into sexuality, I didn't get to explore, and I didn't have anybody around me to tell me what it was supposed to actually be like, and I struggle with that as a parent now. What do you how do you unfold these things to your kids and things like that? And for us, it's a lot of use whatever language that they can understand at the time that you're communicating with them, but give them as much information as is pertinent. You know what I mean? Because I knew 14-year-olds who were getting pregnant because their folks didn't tell them anything about sex. You know what I mean? I knew 14-year-olds that were involved in bogus situations because their folks hadn't given them any advice about how to avoid these bogus ass situations. And so, by the time I'm 17, now I'm completely miseducated on how I should be approaching this thing. And not only that, but it's defined my worldview. So now I'm going to go into my 20s with this idea that this is how it's supposed to be. And I'm only going to attract people that want to also play the same role. Until I finally attract somebody who's that's not how I'm used to doing it. And then I have to say, well, let me ask myself, like, why am I used to doing it the way that I'm used to doing it? And has it ever actually worked out? Because I have this trail of fucking broken hearts. You know what I mean? And maybe that's not the way to be.
Wow. I was clinging to this phrase after you said it. Prioritizing other people's perception.
Sheesh.
First, you said that. That was a good one. First of all, I think that could carry us into anywhere. But wow, prioritizing other people's perception is probably how I lived like the first 32 years of my life.
Wow, yeah. Totally.
And I'm totally healed, and I can totally say that now. No, I'm not totally healed, but I've been doing a lot of work on that, like prioritizing other people's perception of me, like coming from the situation being somebody that wants to be likable, affable, amenable, easygoing, right? Really caring about other people's perceptions, putting, there's this idea, right? Putting our needs first. You have to know what you want first to be able to even prioritize your own needs. And especially in the context of sexuality and sexual expression, for many women in particular, like who, are not used to even understanding our own bodies, much less so than men. I think it's fair to say that, for a lot of folks, like a woman's anatomy is still a mystery, and like it's 2021. It it shouldn't be so, that, and I think it's amazing to have, to change that story and change that conversation, that you now have that ability with kids of your own. Because there is just a lot of, I think for a lot of us growing up, and whatever your situation was, it was either secrecy or shame or we don't do that in our house. And it's like, okay. And like you said, if you don't have folks that are around you that can sort of talk to you about this is the way this works, and this is that, and if you want to do this, that's okay, and sort of give you a supportive, loving environment, then you're going to seek other outlets and channels to figure this stuff out. And, just quite frankly, a lot of those other teachers out there were, again, like sort of giving us this homogeneous picture of what these relationships are supposed to look like and feel like, and how we're supposed to act. And then it starts to feel like you're playing a role, literally, like, okay, I've seen this is how that's done, right?
Totally,
like, so,
totally,
okay.
Totally.
And that, it's again, I want to say, like, it's funny. Like some of it is funny, and some of it's just not funny. I think of like decades lost.
Right.
like oh my gosh. And again, just being so, just sort of like the fear around that, especially, coming from, I ended up becoming single at the age of 30. And I had been in a relationship for 13 years. So the last time I had been single was like 16, 17. So now I'm like in a 30-year-old self, with still the mind kind of like without the experience, or I don't know, it was just a really weird time to be single. And I was in a monogamous relationship through college. And I know that's maybe when a lot of people, those years, and I should say not if necessarily if you went to college, but like the years of which are typical college age, like 18 to 22 can be a highly experimental period for folks. But, and I was in one serious monogamous relationship. So then by the time I'm 30 years old, I'm like, oh my gosh, like now what? And just feeling like so inept, uninformed, confused, but also being like, a lot of my contemporaries are already married, or that, I just felt like in this very weird place socially to be in my 30s, and like, so it was a really interesting, difficult time. And you also talked about, kind of the vibe that you're putting out is going to attract a certain vibe. And I couldn't figure out why I kept attracting the same kind of bullshit.
Right.
But it had to do with what I was presenting. And I don't mean that in a physical sense, but I just sort of mean my whole attitude of how I thought I was supposed to behave and interact with men in particular was translating to kind of the same type of douchey guy. Right. Over and over again until I figured out, like, okay, well, maybe I need to change something. And sure enough, that something changed.
Right. And I think about it like we say, again, a certain generational aspect or time and place aspect. Like, you happen to manifest as that 30-year-old in that date, and that place and time. But had you been that 30-year-old in 2021, maybe you'd have already thought that you had different options than just finding some douchebag, because, I don't know, 8 years ago, the douchebag was more sought after. You know what I mean? Like the douchebag was higher up in the hierarchy of like, what's the
they were still pretty high
that you want, you know what I mean? I want this kind of douchebag. I kind of want this douchebag, you know what I mean? Like, we were kind of taught, like, I know I myself, I'm again talking about being raised on media and shit like that. Like, we're taught like you should be able to throw somebody over your shoulder and that's what they really want. You know what I mean? It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
That's actually not. Like, maybe there's an avatar of person who likes that type of shit, but I bet you even other people are fitting into that avatar that actually don't like that type of shit. Like, the last thing I want you to do is, like, have no consent at all about what I want to do and then just assume it, that I'm gonna love this shit. You know what I mean? Because, like, I don't know, some movie told you I was gonna love this type of shit when you gotta do it, and, like, it's an interesting based on, again, on time period. Like, there's this song called I think it's called Mamacita. It's by Outkast. It's on the Gemini album. I was listening to this again, right? And it's like Andre 3000's got this verse where he's like it's basically like a woman has gone to her friend's house because she's shaky with her boyfriend or whatever right there, right? So she's going to her friend's house, her girlfriend's house. And they start to drinking, and her girl starts like, like, oh, you're so beautiful, like starting to hit on her, like her friend starts hitting on her, you know what I mean? And so this is like Andre 3000's like telling the story in the rap. Like, so you're with your girl at the time, it felt like achy breaky, heart in your hole, feel like a trachea, oh dami. It's like this whole story. In the end of the story, he's like, so now that your friend is hitting on you, here's what you got to do. Grab her by her throat. You know what I mean? I'm like, tell her don't disrespect me. You know what I mean? And you're like, wait, what? So I'm listening to this song again. I'm like, wait a second. So that you're basically being like, so as a man, I'm telling you, if you're having a problem with your boyfriend and you go and talk to your girlfriend and she starts hitting on you, now you got to choke her. Right. So as a 16-year-old, you're like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be hitting on them girls. But in 2021, it's a whole different thing. Like, nah, maybe like if your man's being a douchebag and you go over and your friend is trying to hang out with you, like, give it a shot. Like, like that's actually where we're at now. Like, that's more of a common response. It's definitely more gonna be a more common response than choke her out. Like, we're over that shit. Like, don't ever do that. That's the last thing that you should ever do. Is choke her out because she's trying to hit on you. Like, get up and leave. Like, that's the better advice. You know what I mean? Like, just go home. Whatever. But again, that's from the male standpoint of being like, when I'm hearing it, I'm like, that's insecurity. That's male insecurity. That's a dude being like, if I'm having a problem with my girlfriend and she goes off, you should choke anybody who tries to hit on you. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so again, I don't know. I say all that to say, like, the time and place definitely plays a big role in what happens when we manifest in these different places. Like, I manifested as a single misogynistic man and decided that I didn't want to be that anymore. And then was like, let me try to seek out more feminine energy. Let me try to find more femme friends. Let me start hanging with more queer folk. Let me hang out with people who aren't just like toxic men that are all about like trying to bash heads and prove that the next man isn't shit compared to them, you know, and let me see what happens. Like maybe if I don't keep on surrounding myself by all these alpha, beta, theta, fucking this hierarchy of dudes who want to be wolves, then let's see what happens. Because I'm secure enough in my own personality that I don't need to like butt heads with Michael to impress Jared in order for me to feel good about myself. You know what I mean?
I even think of if we're kind of on music, like, you know, kids growing up today with Lil Nas X and Montero or something, right?
Right.
And getting that kind of vibe, right? And that, and I love that's out there, and that's another option. That's another perspective, right? That's just like let's just bring it to the table, and so that, you know, someone sitting at home, I just think of, you know, all the decades of, you know, especially our parents' generation, of just the repression and the shame of, you know, repressing any thoughts or feelings. And I think we've mentioned this before, and maybe we haven't mentioned it on air, but we've certainly talked about it, you and I, of all the things that from a hetero perspective, like what I've learned from queer culture and just, you know, it's just opened up so many doors. Right, in terms of exploration of our own bodies, wants, and needs, rather again than this sort of like narrow perspective that just like shames everybody outside of like procreation.
Right,
you know,
right.
I don't know. It's just like, oh man, you know, I want to like check my watch and be like, all right, are we done with that yet? Have we moved on? But you know, but consent, and it's a very real thing, obviously, and it's huge, and there's always I feel like we can't talk about consent without talking about dynamics of power between two or more people, and yeah, there's just always so many layers to a situation, right? Like I can think of times where I verbally agreed or went along with something, but it was because, you know, I didn't really feel in control of the situation. You know, I think we, you know, and this doesn't necessarily have to be in a sexual context. Maybe you agreed to take a job, or, you know, any other number of things because you were in a dynamic where you were like, I can't really say no for whatever reason. And some more extreme than others. Some may feel like I can't say no. It's like a life-threatening, I can't say no, right? There's like an endangerment piece to that all the way down the line. But yeah, I think that, you know, always like that playing field, that power dynamic, like really can kind of like play into, you know, how and why we say what we say, right?
Right. Totally. Power dynamic is one of the things that makes me think the most about like how we attract certain vibe, you know what I mean? Because it's like, you know, not to make it sound too extreme, right? Like, because I'm gonna use extreme example, but it's not, everything doesn't have to fall into this extremity of the example that I'm gonna use, or the extremeness or whatever. But basically, like, predators look for prey. You know what I mean? Like, predators aren't trying to find other predators to eat. Like, a lion's not trying to eat another lion. A lion wants to go and find a gazelle to eat. You know what I mean? Like, that's the case. You know, if a lion's not looking to get into a lion fight, then it's not trying to find other lions to fight. You know what I mean? And so we get a chance to manipulate our own energy so much, and to look at our own selves and how we're presenting outwardly so much, that we get to decide what is the role that I'm trying to play in the world. Like, do I want to play that power dynamic game? And if so, am I a predator? Am I prey? Like, am I putting myself out there in the world for anybody to come and take advantage of me? Or am I putting myself out in the world because I'm trying to find mutual benefit, you know? Okay, well, if I'm putting myself in the world as somebody who's looking for mutual benefit and looking for, you know, to make sure that all the boats rise, then those are probably the people that I'm going to start to attract. But if I don't know what I want, or if I'm not used to being out there, if I'm used to being the victim in that position, well then that I'm probably gonna go out there in the world. It's like walking into a bar, you know what I mean? And like, there's somebody standing at the end of the bar looking for the type of person to walk in the door, you know, and they're clocking that. Everybody who comes through the door, that's not them. That's not them. Oh, that's them. That's that person. They look lonely. They look X, Y, and Z, fill in the blank. And now I'm going to go and put my charm on. Because I couldn't have put my charm on those two people. They looked too powerful when they came through the door. Or I couldn't have put my charm on that person because I already did, and now it won't work again. And so, you know, we have these like almost character roles that we come into playing, which then makes me think of gender roles, which then makes me think of, you know, how strict are you even defining what your gender is supposed to be doing, you know what I mean? And so then you know, if you can say like, oh, I'm a heterosexual femme, but that means all these things, you know, well then you're gonna find people that love to do all these things. But if you're like, I'm a heterosexual femme and that just means this, well then that's all you're gonna find. That's the only avenue that you're gonna be able to rock down, because the heterosexual femme that attracts the energy where it's like, no, you can really kind of go this full spectrum. If you're scared of the full spectrum, well then you drop down to the middle. Well then those are the people that you're gonna attract. That's the person who's gonna be like, oh, that's what I'm gonna go for. Until, you know, enough of the bouncing off the walls attracts that person that's watching you bounce off the wall and says, hey, just step over that wall. Look, you can still be over here and do exactly what you're trying to do, but it looks like this when you take some of those blinders off. You know?
I think an important part of what you just described too, because I agree with you, is that if we think about it in terms of like predator prey, or like, because, you know, there are, let's be honest, there's people out there that are like looking to score on certain things. And I think when I think about what I heard you just say, I think of it more as like a presentation of energy that you give off, because I would hate any listener to think like anybody's like wearing a certain thing that attracts or doesn't attract. Like, you can be wearing a paper bag, you can be having the most confident energy and wearing nothing, and no one's going to come near you and fuck with you. Or, you know, you could, so it's not about, so I just wanted to like put that out there, that it's not about a physical presentation, you know, just speaking from that female perspective. Oftentimes we might internalize like, oh, am I not supposed to wear something, right? That's going to invite a kind of thing. No, it has absolutely nothing to do with how you're physically presenting in terms of what is or is not on your body at any given time, but there's an energy, an energy that's given out. And I've thrown that gazelle energy out for a couple of years. I was that, and I attracted some stank ass lions, and and I proudly, through a lot of work in the last several years, do not give out those same vibes. Right. But I just wanted to just decouple any notion that this is a vibe thing. This is an energy thing that people sense, right? Yeah. Like, it's a, you know, that's what's going on.
Well, I think about, when you said it like that, it made me think about Carnival, you know, like Caribbean Carnival, and how, you know, you got a woman in a thong with a bathing suit that's only covering her nipples with a fucking peacock wings on her sides. That doesn't mean anything for anybody. That's for that woman to do that thing, and it doesn't assume consent that anybody can jump up on that woman and do whatever they want to, because she's going to turn down 150 people. And it doesn't even have to be a femme that's dressed like that, and that doesn't mean that they deserve to have their ass grabbed either. Maybe they're not there for that at all, you know what I mean? I have a friend of mine who, because I'll also preface this with, like, I'm lit. Like, all my friends are lit. Like, when we go out, we like to have a very, very good time, and we like to turn up, and we like to create a circle of safety where anybody can step into that circle of safety and turn up. But you can't bring any sort of, like, predatory energy in there, because we're going to catch you quick and we're going to put you out. And that doesn't even just have to be a man. It could be any gender of person can come in there with the wrong intentions, the wrong energy, and it's not going to be a good place. They're going to want to vacate because it doesn't feel safe for them to step into the safe place and try to take advantage of people. And a lot of times it's like trying to pick out if people are extra drunk or whatever. But I have this one friend who's, like, you know, voluptuous or whatever, and a very rugged dancer, and so, like, she might, like, put her feet up on the wall and start doing handstands and dancing, you know what I mean? And So every once in a while, like, somebody will get out of line and think like, oh, that means that I can like slap her on the ass. Well, then everything stops. Now we're not having fun anymore, you know?
Right.
And the person's like, oh, but I thought that's the energy you were putting out. It's like, well, no, that's your baggage. Like, that's what your past experience is telling you, that this is what you're supposed to do. And somebody's just having fun, you're supposed to slap them on the ass. And so
Right.
I appreciate you making the distinction between, like, it's not about what you have on or who you are, how beautiful you are, how less beautiful you want to present in that moment. Like, it's about mutual respect. It's about consent, period. And that goes for whatever attire you have on, because, you know, again, we're not just talking about like nightlife, which people
Right.
are getting put in these ugly situations all the time. And they're not, again,
All
not
the time.
necessarily even like not to take it to too violent of a place or anything like that. It could just simply be somebody looking for somebody who they can manipulate into always cooking them breakfast, always making them coffee. If you're going to be the person that tells me I got to get up and make my own coffee, then you're not the person I want. That's like a specific type of mentality and personality type, you know. Not
Oh,
necessarily.
absolutely.
I like making
Yeah,
coffee myself.
I think that like like the term seduction comes to mind, but it's not always in a sexual way. It can be, you know, whatever. I've been lulled into giving up my business, right? I was and that was the energy, you know, that I was inhabiting at the time. You know, I was a unfortunately an easy target, but fortunately, you know, that experience made me stronger and kind of made me open my eyes a little bit and kind of realize, you know, where am I at personally, and what do I want, and how do I want to, you know, what kind of energy do I want to put out there. But yeah, definitely it can be in all things, you know, those friendships. If you're like, you know, man, I'm always driving my friend to school like every single day, even if I have somewhere else to be. You know, it's like, you know, all kinds of things. But yeah, consent, checking in, kind of last words, last thoughts. We talked a little bit about, like, you know, whether it doesn't matter how long you've been in any kind of relationship, friendship, work relationship, sexual partnership, like, just always, I feel like you just can't check in enough times.
Right. I feel like,
you know,
it's also this element of like checking in with oneself constantly. Like, so much of our conversation right now has been about checking in with the other people that are in these relationships with us, but the root of it, and you said this very early on in the conversation, is checking in with ourselves. Like, do I still want this? Is this what I still like to do? Am I still that person that goes out looking for that thing? Or am I going to look at is that serving me? So if it's not serving me because I've checked in with it, can I let it go? And if I've let it go, now can I check in with what I'm going to fill it with, or what I'm going to replace that with? So it's this constant check-in with ourselves, and that for me is the whole premise of like self-exploration, of also exploring self-expression. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm this type of person, so I only wear this type of clothing. Well, maybe I don't like to wear just that type of clothing. What's it like if I wear this type of clothing? Oh, well, I like that. Okay, I'm going to do that. And let me check in with myself. Do I still like this? You know, do I still want this to be that way? You know, like, I very recently changed my bathing suit style. You know what I mean? I was like, you know, I don't really like surf shorts. Like, I don't like big baggy shorts. It doesn't do anything for me. So I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to wear tighter shorts. I'm going to wear shorts that more fit me while I'm swimming. They don't get a big old air bubble in them when I jump in the water. And I'm going to see what happens. And, you know, maybe somebody of mine was like, oh man, why are you wearing those skimpy shorts? Well, thank God I don't care what you think.
right.
You know what I mean? Or else maybe I'd not check in with myself. I'm checking in with this guy. Hey guy, how do you feel about my shorts? Well, I think they make me feel uncomfortable. Oh shit, I didn't want to do that. You being comfortable is more important than my own personal comfort, so I'm going to go and change my shorts because I haven't taken the time to check in with myself to say, like, no, your personal comfort is way more important than their personal comfort.
When you put it like that, I actually absolutely love that analogy. Because when you put it like that, it seems absurd. Right? Like, I'm going to ask this dude, like, right? How do my shorts make you feel? Are you cool with that? Like, I feel like when we break it down into something that just seems so preposterous, yet that's often what we're doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just, so thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
you know, it's just like, I don't give a fuck with this guy, you know? But, you know, you know, I mean, everybody, give yourselves a break, everybody.
Right. And continuously check in, because the thing that you thought might have been the way that you felt about it last year might not be the same when you feel about it this year.
Right. You know, maybe it's like, fuck this, I am going to wear crop tops.
Right.
Or maybe I'm not, you know, whatever it is.
Right,
you know?
Exactly.
And I think, you know, it's funny. For some reason, what's coming up for me right now is sometimes I feel like people, when they say, oh, you've changed, they sort of wield that as almost like a bad thing or an insult, right? And it's like, yeah, you haven't? Like,
right, totally.
And I know this kind of comes up a lot for us, but, you know, I hope that I continue to change and evolve, and that, you know, and that I'm always in tune with that. Like, what do I need today? It's different than what I needed last year. And what do I like today? And it's different, you know. I don't necessarily have the same music taste or clothing taste or hair taste or you know, whatever it is. But being sort of true to yourself, and we always talk about, you know, just checking in, meditating, journaling, whatever it is, like, you know, just being like, all right, you know, who am I today, and what do I want today? Where am I going? What do I, you know, where do I want to be? Just doing that constant stuff. And yeah, if someone tells me I've changed, that's like, sweet, thank you.
Right. Thank you for noticing.
I'm
doing all this work on myself. I hope it's showing.
I know. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of work. Thank you. Feels good. That's awesome. I'm going to be thinking about big surf shorts with the air bubble. It is summer.
Yeah.
It's swim season.
Yeah, I'm picking out bathing suits right now. I'm
just thinking of like somebody doing a back float, you know, and like the shorts are puffed up in the water. Oh man, that happens in bathing suits too.
Oh my god, it's so crazy. I think about all of the minor self checks that we are always doing, like these micro self checks, you know what I mean, to try to make sure that the thing that I don't want to show isn't showing, or the thing that I want to show is showing, or you know what I mean. It's like these micro adjustments of trying to fit whatever role that I think I'm supposed to be playing. You know, is my hair in the right place?
Oh, I feel like. I feel like next week we continue this conversation about all that. Just kind of brings up so much about sort of these acts of self-consciousness. You know, that I know I still carry some of my old baggage with me. But yeah, we'll have to elaborate on that next time.
Oh, I look forward to that. Awesome.
Oh man, well this has been another awesome hour, just under an hour. As always, talking with you, Mujib.
And, my pleasure.
Yeah, always a joy. We always get to some of the nitty gritty stuff. I hope you guys at home have enjoyed listening, and check in with yourself. Here's your homework. Check in with yourself. Check in with your friends, relatives, partners, coworkers, and make sure everything's all good.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's it. That's another episode of Let's Get To It. My name is Sarah.
My name is Mujib.